Hello, and welcome back to Kim Reads as we continue with Wicked, Bach, Chapter 3. So the summer began. Since he passed his exams, Bach was free to plan one last year at Briscoe Hall. Daily, he hied himself over the library at Three Queens, where, under the watchful eye of a titanic rhinoceros, the head archival librarian, he sat cleaning old manuscripts that clearly weren't looked at for more than once a century. When the rhino was out of the room, he had flighty conversations with the two boys on either side of him. Classic Queen's boys, full of gibbering gossip and arcane references, teasing and loyal. He overjoyed them when they were good spirits, and he detested their sulks. Crope and Tibet and Crope. Bach pretended confusion when they got too arch or suggestive, which seemed to happen about once a week, but they backed off quickly. In the afternoons, they would talk about their They would all take their cheese sandwiches by the banks of the Suicide Canal and watch the swans. The strong boys at Crewe, coursing up and down the canal for summer practice, made Crope and Tibet swoon and fall on their faces in the grass. Bach laughed at them, not unkindly, and waited for fate to deliver Galinda onto his path. It wasn't too long a wait. About 3 weeks after their vegetable garden liaison, on a windy summer morning, a small earthquake caused some minor damage at Three Queens Library, and the building had to be closed for some patching. Tibet, Crope, and Bach took their sandwiches with some beakers of tea from the buttery. They flopped down at their favorite place on the grassy banks of the canal. 15 minutes later came along Amma Clutchin with Galinda and two other girls. "I do believe we know you," said Amma Clutch, as Galinda stood demurely a step behind. In such cases as these, it was the servant's duty to elicit names from strangers of the group, so they might greet each other personally. Amma Clutch raged out loud that they were Masters Bach, Crope, and Tibet meeting Mrs. Galinda, Shen, and Fanny. Then Amma Clutch moved a few feet away to allow the young people to address one another. Bach leaped up and gave a small bow, and Galinda said, "As in line with my promise, Master Bach. May I inquire how you're keeping?" "Very well, thank you," said Bach. "He's as ripe as a peach," said Tibet. "He's downright luscious from this angle," said Crope, setting a few steps behind. But Bach turned and glared so fiercely that Crope and Tibet were chastened and fell into a mock sulk. "And you, Miss Galinda?" continued Bach, searching her well-composed face. "You are well? How thrilling to see you in shiz for the summer." But that wasn't the right thing to say. The better girls went home for the summer, and Galinda, as a Gillikin must feel deeply she was stuck here, like a Munchkinlander or a commoner. The fan came up, the eyes went down. The Misses Shen and Fanny touched her shoulders in mute sympathy, but Galinda sallied on. "My dear friends, the Misses Fanny and Shen are taking a house for the month of high summer on the shores of Lake George, a little fantasy house near the village of Neverdale. I've decided to make my holiday there instead of taking the tiresome trek back to Pertha Hills." "How refreshing," he said. The beveled edges of her lacquered fingernails and the moth-colored eyelashes, the gaze and buff softness of cheek, the sensitive tuck of skin just at the cleft of her upper lip. In the summer morning light, she was dangerously inebriated, magnified. "Steady," said Crope, and he and Tibet jumped up. They each caught Bach by the elbow. He then remembered to breathe. He couldn't think of anything else to say, though, and Amma Clutch was turning her hand back round and round in her hands. "So we've got jobs," said Tibet to the rescue. "Three Queens Library. We're housekeeping the literature. We're the cleaning maids of culture. Are you working there, Miss Galinda?" "I should think not," said Galinda. "I need a rest from my studies. It has been a harrowing year. Harrowing. My eyes are still tired from reading." "How about you girls?" said Crope, outrageously casual, but they only giggled and demurred and inched away. This was their friend's encounter, not theirs. Bach, regaining his composure, could feel the group beginning to shift into motion again. "And Miss Elfie?" he inquired to hold them there. "How's your roomie?" "Headstrong and difficult," said Galinda severely, for the first time speaking in a normal voice, not the faint social whisper. "But thank Lorene, she's got a job, so I get some relief. She's working in the lab in the library under our Dr. Dillman. Do you know of him?" "Dr. Dillman? Do I know of him?" said Bob. "He's the most impressive biology tutor in shiz." "By the by," said Galinda, "he's a goat." Yes, I wish he would I wish he would teach us. Even our professors acknowledge his prominence. Apparently, years ago, back in the region before he used to be invited annually to lecture at Bisco Hall, but the restrictions changed that, so I've never really met him. Just see him at the poetry evening last year, so briefly that was a treat. "Well, he does go on," said Galinda. "Brilliant he may be, but he has no sense of when he's becoming tedious. Anyway, Miss Elfie's hard at work, doing something or other. She will go on about it, too. I think it's contagious." "Well, a lab, it breeds things," said Crow. "Yes," said Tibbet, and incidentally, may I add that you're every bit as lovely as Bach gushes you are. We put it down on an overactive imagination born of affectional and physical frustration." "You know," said Bach, "between your Miss Elfie and my erstwhile friends here, we have no real hope of friendship at all. Shall we organize a duel and kill each other instead? Count off 10 paces, turn, and shoot? It would save so much bother." But Galinda didn't approve of such joking. She nodded in a dismissive way, and the group of females moved along the gravel path, following the curve of the canal. Miss Shen was heard to say in a deep, breathy voice, "Oh, my dear, he is sweet, in a toy-like way." The voice faded out. Bach turned to rail at Crope and Tibet, but they feel like tickling him, and all collapsed in a heap on the remains of their lunch. And since there was no hope in changing them, Bach abandoned the impulse to correct his friends. Really, what difference did their callow banter make if Miss Galinda found him so impossible? A week later, on his afternoon off, Bach took himself into Railway Square. He lingered at a kiosk, staring. Cigarettes, ear-stabs, love charms, naughty drawings of women undressing, and skulls painted with lurid sunsets overladen with one-line inspirational slogans. Lurleen lives within each heart. Safe keep the wizard's laws, and the wizard's laws will keep you safe. I pray to the unnamed God that justice will walk abroad in Oz. Bach noted the variety, the pagan, the authoritarian, and the old-fashioned unionist impulses, but nothing directly sympathetic to the royalists who had gone underground in the 16 harsh years since the wizard had first wrestled power from the Ozma regent. The Ozma line had been Gillikinese originally, and sure there was pockets of resistance to the wizard, but Gillikin had, in fact, thrived under the wizard, so the royalists kept mum. Besides, everyone heard the rumors of strict court action against turncoats and Paris trophists. Bach kept a broadsheet published out of the Emerald City, several weeks old, but it was the first time he had seen in some time, and he settled down at a cafe. He read about the Emerald City Home Guards suppressing some animal dissenters who were making a nuisance of themselves in the palace gardens. He looked for news of the provinces and found a filler about Munchkinland, which continued experiencing near-drought conditions. Occasional thunderbursts would drench the ground, but the water would run off or sink uselessly into the clay. They said that the hidden subterranean lakes underlay the Vincas region, that water resources there could serve the whole of Oz. But the idea of a canal system across the entire country made everyone laugh. The expense. There was some great disagreement between the eminences and the Emerald City as to what was to be done. Succession, thought Bach seditiously, and looked up to see Elphaba alone, without even a nanny or Amma standing over him. "What a delicious expression you have on your face, Bach," she said. "It's much more interesting than love." "It is love, in a way," said Bach, then remembered himself and leapt to his feet. "Won't you join me? Please take a seat, unless you're worried about being unchaperoned." She sat down, looking a bit etiolated, allowed him to call for a cup of mineral tea. She had a parcel in brown paper and string under the arm. "A few trinkets for my sister," she said. "She's like Miss Galinda. She loves the fancy outside of things. I found a Vinkish shawl in the bazaar, red roses on the black background with black and green fridge. I'm sending it to her. A pair of striped stockings that Amma Clutch knitted for me." "I didn't know you had a sister," he said. "Was she in the play group when we were together?" "She's 3 years younger," Elphaba said. "She'll come to Credge Hall before long." "Is she as difficult as you are?" "She's difficult in a different way. She's crippled pretty severely, is my Nestor Rose. So she's a handful. Even Madame Morrible doesn't quite know the extent of it. But then, I'll be a third-year girl and will have the nerve to stand up to the head. I guess if anything gives me my nerve, it's people making life hard for Nestor Rose. Life has already been hard enough for her. Is your mother raising her?" "My mother is dead. My father is in charge, nominally." "Nominally?" "He's religious," said Elphaba, and made the circling palms gesture that indicate you could write a milestone against millstone all you like. There wasn't any quern in the land that could produce flour if there was no grain to grind. "It sounds very hard for you all. How did your mama die?" "She died in childbirth." And this is the end of the personal interview. "Tell me about Dr. Gillikin. I heard you're working for him. Tell me about your amusing campaign for the heart of Galinda, the Ice Queen." Bach really wanted to hear more about Dr. Gillikin, but was derailed by Elphaba's remark. "I will keep on, Elfie. I will. When I see her, I'm so smitten with longing. It's like fire in my veins. I can't speak. And the things I think about are like visions. It's like dreaming. It's like floating in your dreams." "I don't dream." "Tell me, is there any hope? What does she say? Does she ever imagine that her feelings for me might change?" Elphaba sat with her 2 elbows on the table, her hands clapped in front of her face, her 2 forefingers leaning against each other and against her thin grayish lips. "You know, Bach," she said, "the thing I have become most fond of Galinda myself. Behind her starry-eyed love of herself, there is a mind struggling to work. She does think about things when her mind is really working. She could, if led, think on you. Even if I suspect, somewhat fondly. I suspect. I don't know. And when she slides back to herself, I mean to the girl who spends 2 hours a day curling that beautiful hair, it's as if she's thinking Galinda goes into some internal closet and shuts the door. Or as if she's in hysterical retreat from things that are too big for her. I love her both ways, but I find it odd. I wouldn't mind leaving myself behind if I could, but I don't know the way out." "I propose you're being hard on her, and you're certainly too forward," said Bach sternly. "Were she sitting here, I think she'd be astounded to hear you speak so freely. I'm just trying to behave as I think a friend should behave. Granted, I haven't had much practice. Well, I question your friendship with me, if you consider Miss Galinda your friend too. And that's how you tear a friend apart in her absence." Though Bach was irritated, he found this was more a lively discussion and the conventional patter he and Galinda had so far exchanged. He didn't want to burn Elphaba off with criticism. "I'm ordering you another mineral tea," he said in an authoritative voice, his father's voice in fast, "and you can tell me about Dr. Gillikin." "Skip the tea. I'm still nursing this one, and you have no more money than I do, I bet," said Elphaba. "But I'll tell you about Dr. Gillikin. unless you are too affronted at the slice and angle of my opinions. Please, perhaps I was wrong, said Bach. Look, it's a nice day. We're both off campus. How do you come to be out alone, by the way? Is your escape sanctioned by Madame Morble? Take a guess about that, she said, grinning. Once it was clear that you could come and go from Crage Hall by the way of vegetable garden and the roof of a adjacent table, I decided I could too. I'm never missed. That's hard for me to believe, said he daringly. You're not the kind who blends into the workwood. Now tell me about Dr. Delliman. He's my idol. She sighed and set down a package down the table at last and settled in for a long chat. She told him about Dr. Delliman's work in the natural essence, trying to determine by scientific method what real differences were between animal and animal tissue, and between animal and human tissue. The literature on the matter she had learned from doing the legwork itself was all couched in unionist terms. The pagan terms before that, she didn't hold up to scientific scrutiny. Don't forget Shiz University was originally a unionist monastery, said Elphaba, so despite the anything-goes-on attitude among the educated elite, there are still bedrocks of unionist bias. But I'm a unionist, said Bach, and I don't see the conflict. The unnamed God is accommodating to many ranges of being, not just human. Are you talking about a subtle bias against animals interwoven into early unionist tracts and is still in operation today? That's certainly what Dr. Delliman thinks, and he's a unionist himself. Explain that paradox and I'll be glad to convert. I admire the goat intensely. The real interest is that of me is the political slant. If he can isolate some of that biological architecture to prove that there isn't any difference deep down in the invisible pockets of human and animal flesh, that there's no difference between us or even among us, if you take an animal flesh too, you'll see the implications. No, said Bach, I don't think I do. How can the bans on animal mobility be upheld if Dr. Delliman can prove scientifically that there is an inherent difference between humans and animals? Okay, that's the blueprint for an impossibly rosy future, said Bach. Think about it, said Elphaba. Think, Bach. On what grounds could the wizard possibly continue to publish those bans? How could he be persuaded not to? The wizard has dissolved the Hall of Approval indefinitely. I don't believe, Elphaba, that the wizard is opening to entertaining arguments, even by as august an animal as Dr. Delliman. But of course he must be. He's a man in power. It's his job to consider changes in knowledge. When Dr. Delliman has his proof, he'll write to the wizard and begin to lobby for change. No doubt he'll do his best to let animals the land over know what he's intending to do. He isn't a fool. Well, I didn't say he was a fool, said Bach. How close do you think he's getting to firm evidence? I am a student handmaid, said Elphaba. I don't even understand what he means. I'm only a secretary, an ammunitionist. You know, he can't write things himself. He can't manage a pen with his hooves. I take dictation, I file and dash to the Crage Hall Library and look things up. Briscoe Hall Library would be a better place to hunt for that kind of material, said Bach. Even Three Queens, where I worked this summer, has stacks of documents from the monk's observation of the animal and vegetable life. I know I'm not traditionally presented, said Elphaba, but I do believe on the grounds of being a girl, I'm excluded from the Briscoe Hall Library, and on the grounds of being an animal, so too, now at last, is Dr. Delliman. So these valuable resources are off limits to us. Well, said Bach carelessly, if you knew exactly what you wanted, I have access to the stacks in both collections. And when the good doctor has finished ferreting out the difference between animals and people, I will propose he apply the same arguments to the difference between the sexes, said Elphaba. Then she registered what Bach said and stretched out her hand, almost as if to touch him. Oh, Bach, on behalf of Dr. Delliman, I accept your generous offer of help. I'll get the list of sources to you within a week. Just leave my name out of it. I don't care so much about incurring horrible morals wrath against myself, but I don't want her taking out her annoyance on my sister, Nessa Rose. She downed the last of her tea, gathered her parcel, and had sprung up almost before Balkan could pull himself to his feet. Various customers, lingering over their elevenses with broadsheets or novellas, looked at the young gaily girl pushing out their doors. As Bach settled back down, hardly registering what he got himself into, he realized slowly but surely that this morning there were no animals taking their morning tea here. No animals at all. And that's the end of that chapter. See you later.